There is a kind of justice we carry in our chests, not the courtroom kind. Not the kind with verdicts and sentences and closure handed to you in an envelope. The quiet kind, the private kind. The kind where we decide, consciously or not, that the person who hurt us does not deserve our forgiveness, and we hold that decision like a shield. We call it self-protection. We call it boundaries. We call it not letting them off the hook. But here's what nobody tells you about the hook. You're on it too. This is the paradox of forgiveness. Grace was 53 years old when she finally admitted she had spent 30 years in a prison. She built herself. She was a school counselor in Birmingham, Alabama. Soft-spoken, deeply empathetic with other people's pain. Brilliant at helping teenagers untangle the knots of their young lives. She had a gift for it, a patience that her colleagues admired and her students relied on. But at home, alone, she carried something that never softened. Her brother James had betrayed her when she was 22. The details are hers and hers alone, but the shape of it was this. He had taken something from her: trust, money, a future she had carefully saved toward. And he had done it without remorse, without apology, without even the dignity of acknowledgement. James moved on with his life. Married, had children, sent Christmas cards to the family as though nothing had happened. And Grace watched all of it from behind a wall she had built the day she decided she would never forgive him. The wall felt righteous at first. That is the thing about unforgiveness that makes it so seductive. In the beginning, it feels like power. Grace had been made powerless by what James did, and the refusal to forgive gave her something back: a position, a moral high ground she could stand on and look down from. She was the wronged one. He was the guilty one. As long as she held that, the story was clear. The roles were assigned. The world made sense. But 30 years is a long time to maintain a wall. And walls, it turns out, do not know the difference between keeping someone out and keeping yourself in. Grace began to notice it in small ways first. She noticed she could not fully enjoy family gatherings because James existed somewhere in the orbit of them. She noticed she had a pattern of ending friendships abruptly. The moment someone disappointed her, even mildly, the door closed. Final. No appeal. She noticed she had not been in a relationship that lasted longer than 2 years. Not because men had not loved her, some of them had loved her deeply. But the moment love required her to be vulnerable, to risk being hurt, to hand someone the power to damage her, she left first. She told herself she had high standards. She told herself she simply hadn't met the right person. She had 100 clean explanations that kept the real one safely out of view. The real one was this: she had decided at 22 that she would never again give anyone the opportunity to do what James had done. And she had kept that promise to herself with ruthless consistency. She had protected herself so completely, she had accidentally sealed herself inside the protection. 300 miles north in Nashville, Tennessee, a man named Robert was living a different version of the same story. 47 years old, contractor, big hands, quiet demeanor, the kind of man people describe as solid, dependable, the person you called when something needed to be fixed. Robert's father had left when he was 9 years old, packed a bag on a Wednesday afternoon and walked out the door with the particular casualness of a man going to buy milk. He never came back. Robert's mother worked 2 jobs. His younger sister looked to him for stability he was too young to fully provide. And Robert learned early that the world was a place where the people who were supposed to stay left. Where love had an expiration date nobody showed you in advance. He had never forgiven his father. He had also, without fully realizing it, never forgiven himself for the helpless 9-year-old who stood at the window and watched a man walk away and could do nothing to stop it. Robert became the most reliable person in every room he entered. He showed up early. He stayed late. He finished what he started. He was so determined to be the opposite of his father that he built his entire identity around it. And for a long time, that felt like healing. But reliability without vulnerability is just another kind of wall. Robert could show up for everyone, fix everyone's problems, carry everyone's weight. What he could not do was ask for help, admit weakness, let someone see him uncertain or afraid or in need. Because the 9-year-old still living somewhere inside his chest had decided, need is what gets you abandoned. Show that you need someone and they will use it as their cue to leave. His father had not just left the house that Wednesday afternoon. He had left a lesson, and Robert had been a faithful student ever since. He had 2 failed marriages behind him. Both wives had said variations of the same thing on the way out the door. I feel like I'm living with someone who won't let me in, like there's a version of you I'm never allowed to meet. Robert heard it. He just didn't know what to do with it. Here is where the paradox lives. Unforgiveness feels like a sentence we pass on someone else. We imagine the person who hurt us carrying it, feeling the weight of our withheld grace, suffering somehow from our refusal to release them. But James was sending Christmas cards. Robert's father had built a whole other life in another state, with other children who called him Dad. The unforgiveness was not touching them. It was not a burden they carried. It had never left the people who were holding it. Grace's wall had kept James out. It had also kept everyone else out. Every person who might have loved her, every friendship that might have grown deep, every moment of genuine belonging, all of it filtered through a gate she had installed at 22 and never found the key to open. Robert's armor had kept his father's abandonment from ever happening again. It had also made him, in his wife's words, impossible to truly reach. He had become, in his devotion to never being his father, something his father might have recognized. A man who was physically present and emotionally gone. We become the prison we built for someone else. Grace's turning point came not in the therapist's office, though she had tried that, not in the church, though she had sat in many pews asking for the willingness she could not manufacture. It came in a session with a 15-year-old girl named Dea. Deja had been betrayed by her best friend. A deep, public, humiliating betrayal. And she sat across from Grace and said, with the full conviction of adolescent certainty, I will never forgive her. Never. She doesn't deserve it. Grace opened her mouth to offer the counselor's response. The measured, therapeutic, appropriate response about how forgiveness is for you, not for them. And stopped. Because she heard herself, 30 years younger, sitting somewhere in her own chest, saying the exact same words with the exact same certainty. She doesn't deserve it. And for the first time, Grace asked herself a question she had successfully avoided for 3 decades. What has deserving it got to do with it? Forgiveness was never about James. James didn't need it. James was fine. Forgiveness was the key to her own gate. The only way out of the structure she had built and then moved into, and then slowly, without noticing, stopped trying to leave. She went home that evening and wrote James a letter she never sent, not because he deserved the words, but because she needed to say them out loud to herself, to hear her own voice release something it had been clenching for 30 years. She cried in a way she hadn't since she was 22, and then, very quietly, something in her chest put down a weight she had carried so long she had forgotten it wasn't part of her body. Robert's moment came slower. The way things come to men who have spent a lifetime being solid. His daughter, from his first marriage, 17 years old, sharp and perceptive in the way teenagers can be, when they've been quietly watching their parents for years, asked him one afternoon why he never talked about his father. Robert gave his usual answer, not much to say, and his daughter looked at him with eyes that had clearly been thinking about this for longer than the question suggested and said, Dad, I think you talk about him every single day, just without using his name. Robert sat with that for a long time. He didn't call his father. His father had died 6 years earlier. Another fact, Robert had received with a quietness that frightened him more than grief would have. He couldn't forgive a man he could no longer speak to, or so he thought. What he discovered in the slow and unglamorous work of therapy and honest conversation and sitting with his own discomfort instead of fixing everyone else's was that forgiveness doesn't require the other person's presence. It doesn't require their apology. It doesn't require them to be alive, available, or even aware. It requires only one person, the one still carrying it. Robert wept for the 9-year-old at the window for the first time in 38 years. And in doing so, he finally, gently, let that boy stop waiting for a man who was never coming back. The paradox of forgiveness does not ask you to pretend it didn't happen. It doesn't ask you to call them, to reconcile, to minimize what was done or absorb it into a story where everyone comes out redeemed. It asks only this. Notice who is serving the sentence. Notice whose life has been organized around the wound, whose choices, relationships, walls, and exits have been quietly governed by a moment that the other person has long since moved on from. Forgiveness is not a gift you give to the person who hurt you. It is a door you open in yourself, and on the other side of it is not the person who wronged you. On the other side is you, the version of you that existed before the hurt arrived, before the wall went up, before you handed the key to someone who never deserved that much power over your life. Grace found her way back to that version of herself at 53. Robert at 47. It is never too late to stop serving someone else's sentence. The prison was always yours to leave. This has been the paradox of forgiveness. Whatever you're holding today, whoever you're holding it against, the door opens from the inside.